The Pan are an average species by galactic standards, average or slightly above average in technology. They're a very thin species with a very similar outer design to another species, a new species discovered called human. They hate this. As humans have just recently reached beyond their own sector, they are considered so primitive to other species that have been spacefaring for over centuries, it's astounding. To call a Pan a human is considered a great insult, yet it was never truly meant to be that way at first. The Pan species deliberately stayed away from humans because of this, especially when they found out that the humans find them attractive, very much so, to the point that the humans actually desire to have offspring with them. This idea actually disgusts the Pan to absolutely no end, and the two species stayed clear of each other for a long time. When the Kirk, a reptilian species, began to push across the universe, most species banded together for protection. Not the humans, though. They simply sent a message to everyone that says, "We can take care of ourselves." The Kirk hordes of ships and personnel jumped in, flooded the planet with their personnel, and killed any that didn't submit, although they did take others as slaves, and then they would decimate the planet for resources and then simply build up stronger and move on. The galactic community would fight to a standstill, a full stalemate, against the horde that's attaching them. The humans offered to help, but it was rejected, as everyone believed humanity to be weak, primitive, barely throwing rocks at the enemy. What could they possibly do? Commerce did continue, however, and when humans arrived with supplies, boy, everybody was happy. Yet, when they saw humans bringing in the supplies, everyone was surprised at what they saw. These humans are very large, larger than the Pan, not by much, maybe considered half a unit, which is about a foot and a half by human measurements. They seem strong, as their arms and legs seem to flex muscle. Their chests on most of them is always moving in a way that protrudes all sorts of musculature. They are also confused, as these creatures, they must be primitive because they're still furry, or sometimes not. It seems as though the grooming standards makes everybody confused, but the fact that they actually still have fur, that makes everyone believe that they're still in their primitive state, as no other species has any type of fur except for the plumage on top of their heads, and that's it. This is usually used as some sort of dimorphism or to show their own standings in their society, but not the humans. The humans that dealt with them were very, very, as the humans would say, professional, except for when they stared at the Pan. And when they stared so much that many of the Pan females, well, for lack of a better term, were creeped the hell out. It was actually something that the human captain laughed about to everyone else. He simply said, "They've been on board ship for a while. Let 'em look at least." They did look a lot like the Pan, although the Pan are quite colorful in comparison with humans. Though the humans have different types of colors to them, mostly very subdued colors, the Pan have different ones. Everything from white to blue to some sort of purples, even black. It was odd, and many of them were, well, confused at how the humans could even differentiate from each other, all being of similar shades. Yet sometimes this question was pushed aside as they watched the humans flex the muscles and move all this heavy equipment, heavy enough that it would take 3 Pans just to lift it up, but one human would lift it well over their heads, seemingly barely even straining, and then very quickly place it in the spot. Because of their strength and extreme dexterity, they made very quick work, and because of their ability to somehow cram even more cargo into the hold, they brought even more than was expected, and everyone was grateful for that, because that meant more of their own luxury items, things that just made life tolerable while all the warfare was happening. While humans work, a crate actually falls and pins down an insectoid called a Sherpa. This Sherpa screamed in pain as the crate fell on it, and the humans immediately turned and ran straight toward him. The Sherpa was surprised at this. They figured that the humans would just lift up the crate, kick the body off to the side, and move on. As Sherpa lives are considered cheap, they are insectoids after all, so they breed very, very quickly. The queen could simply shit out another one of him, and the Sherpa couldn't understand why the humans were saving him. They all pulled out medical bags, and one actually ran over with a very large bag, rolled it out, and began to get to work. This was just odd, as everyone watched and didn't understand why the humans, something so big and so strong, was so caring. They defied any type of logic. They didn't get it. A single pan male tests this by injuring himself, and not badly, but just enough to bleed, just enough where you could see on his yellow skin. The human who sees this stops and asks, "Hey, are you okay?" The pan simply regards, "Oh, it's just a small injury." The human, without skipping a beat, reaches in, pulls a device, turns out to be a dermal regenerator, and asks, "Is there anything else?" As he actually fixes the pan's arm. A few swipes of this device, and the skin seems to close. The blood is still there, but there's not even a scar. What the hell are these creatures anyway? When the pan male told them that there wasn't anything else, the human simply put his device away and got back to work. It was incredible to see them simply disassociate from one job to another, yet it seemed like their minds were constantly on everything. It didn't make sense. But then again, they were a primitive species, so no one cared as long as they brought the supplies when they needed to get there. The war continues, and it does not go well. The Kirk breed fast, almost as fast as the Sherpa do, and because of that, they're overwhelming with numbers. The Kirks are very, very large and lanky, which makes them very strong. If they're able to swing around and catch you with the claws, you're pretty much decapitated if they catch you on the side of the head. With that, they also bring in tremendous weaponry that shocks everyone, as it seems as though they've been waiting and preparing for this war, and they've finally been able to unleash their weapons, and it seems like no matter what, they just keep getting more dangerous. Because of that, the Kirk seemed to be pushing out more and more, and eventually started heading towards human territory. The Sherpa actually sent out a warning to the humans, and the humans simply said, "Okay." They didn't understand. Was this a code? What was going on? When the Kirk actually jumped into human territory, they were simply told to leave and not return. With this, the Kirk simply turned their weapons and fired on the humans. Big mistake. Human primitive ships that seemed to be nothing more than flying bricks seemed to be unbelievably maneuverable, as they're able to maneuver away from every single shot, even at what's considered point-blank range in space. They moved left, right, up, down, center. It even did some sort of weird backflip maneuver. They didn't understand what was going on, but anything to make sure they weren't struck while they were still firing with all their weapons. The armor could even take a few hits while doing all this, and they just kept coming. But what was absolutely horrifying was the armament of the humans. The human main guns off their ships was enough to punch through a Kirk cruiser with minimal effort. In many cases, it would skewer from nose to asshole right through. Seeing this, the Kirk decided that they had one choice, and that was to overwhelm the humans with numbers since they couldn't actually beat them in technology. But the humans had a trick. What they say, a card up their sleeves, whatever the hell that means. With that, they brought in a whole bunch of what they called drone ships. And then these drone ships multiplied, jumping into the system, turning into entire drone fleets. This supplemented their numbers, but these fleets of drones were absolutely horrific for the Kirk. They were able to face them basically 3-to-1 odds. And as the human said, that's not enough, not even close. Now you die, motherfucker. And they just kept firing into the Kirk forces. They held the line completely as the Kirk tried to force a way through, but eventually they just had to retreat. They couldn't keep losing forces like that. Though they did take out several human ships, it seems as though they had to punch through the drone fleet before they actually got to the manned fleets. But to do this, they had to actually take down the drone fleets while the human ships were firing on them at the same time, and their guided munitions were dead nuts accurate. Any Kirk fighter that got anywhere close was immediately taken down by the torpedoes and the missiles. If they got anywhere closer within actual firing range, where they might be able to get a shot off, the point defense systems would tear them to pieces. Eventually, the Kirk left, and what was left of their fleet that invaded the humans joined forces with their assault into Pan space. This fleet was easily 5 to 7 times larger than that was attacking the humans. Because of this, the Pan couldn't hold. They knew they were done. And if they lost this planet that was the last one before their home system, they knew their home system would fall too. They needed help. They called for everyone. They called out to the Sherpa, to the Ganen, to the Shita, to the Onkta'a. Everyone left them waiting. They left their message on red and nobody responded, and eventually they did something they didn't want to do. They called for help from the humans. They were desperate. They knew that if they didn't get any support, nobody would get off that planet. They knew that this world was absolutely needed for the survival of their species. They needed something, so they called the humans, and they figured the humans would want something in return. They figured it would be days of debating on what type of resources they would want, what type of payment, whatever it was that they would have, and they would need to have it ready when the humans arrived or they wouldn't help. They thought this would take too long, far too long. Oh no, they weren't able to hold the line. But when they called the humans, all the humans said was, "We'll be right there." And the call just ended. There was no discussion on logistics, no asking for time to hold out until the humans got there, no demands for compensation, no coordination with Pan forces, no more communications at all. The Pan all looked at each other. Their Empress just held her head low as they believed that they had been abandoned by the last creatures that could have helped. Kirk forces pushed onto the Pan-held garden world, and they began to send down their shuttles under a withering fire support from their own corvettes, destroyers, and cruisers. And as they did, the humans arrived. All guns blazing. They cut into the Kirk fleet, sending their rescue teams into the ships that were still waiting around, partially destroyed. All of these ships that went in to rescue those had a strange red symbol, as though, hey, this is me, don't shoot me, but it didn't matter. The Kirk still fired at them, but those pilots had to be absolutely nuts. They sent all sorts of maneuvers all over, using hulls to block shots, and then they would duck, dive, dip, dive, and dodge all the way around the debris field, finding any life signs they could and immediately latching themselves onto the side. With high risk of themselves, the humans gave everything to save just a few. In some cases, they would have to take off their own suits, exposing themselves to the vacuum and the lack of temperature in space. And they would be in own risk of losing their life just to save one or two of the crew members. Every time one of the Pans saw these things coming, they thought that death had come. They thought the humans had come to finish them off, but no, the humans were there to save them. Many of them cried as the humans pulled them to safety and threw them into the ships. Many of the Pan missing parts or bleeding out profusely were immediately treated with devices that made the Pan absolutely amazed at this technology. What the hell is all they could think. On human ships, the docks and the crews worked to save as many as possible. The Pan that were saved were absolutely confused as why would the humans risk so much? As they worked, they could feel the ship being shuddered sideways as it was taking hits, but all it might do was knock the human down, and then the human would simply get back in position and keep working. The Pan were even more confused as the human would get absolutely irate, not just upset, but they would start slamming their manipulators into the hull of the ship if they were unable to save a single Pan life. They thought, why? Why would they be upset about something that's not even their species? The humans seem willing to damage themselves, sure. High-risk maneuvers just to get the wounded out, and now they're mad that they can't save a life, but many of those that were saved saw the decimation that the humans were giving to the Kirk fleet. They were still ripping the Kirk fleet a new tail and whatever orifice you might think of. And yet, this human in front of them was still doing everything they could just to save a life. They couldn't understand it. Human drop pods crashed through the Kirk lines as they made planetfall. Massive, armored humans came out of the pods and charged right into the Kirk lines. The Kirk spun their weapons around, trying to take down these bipedal, tailless, whatever the hell they were. They couldn't actually see the humans through the suit, but they believed that their weapons would be able to take the humans down. Yet the humans brought something else. A lot of something else. Incredible weapon systems that seemed to punch through Kirk bodies and armor like they weren't even there. Vehicles that were able to traverse terrain that seemed impossible to move around. Aircraft that once inside an atmosphere could maneuver in ways that would make the brain snap into more than the two pieces it's already there. It was absolute pandemonium on the ground as the Kirk realized that they, for the first time, were outmaneuvered, outgunned, and severely outclassed. The humans simply walked forward, not charging anymore, but walked through the hellfire, spraying all sorts of death. Some of them were not even wearing full suits like the first ones were. It seemed as though they had different ways of handling things. Those Pan on the ground that were found were usually picked up by those not in the suits and taken onto the ships any way they could to get them out of the area. Many of these ships took massive damage, and some even crashed back to the ground, and all that happened was another ship would show up. They would load the wounded and then leave. This was absolute pandemonium. But the Pan had seen nothing yet, as they were soon to see what human rage truly was. With all their opposing compassion to get the wounded out, they still fired through living shields. Civilian, old, young, male, female, it didn't matter if the Kirk believed that they could hold up a Pan and this would protect them from the humans. They were wrong. After seeing this, and after punching through the meat shields, the humans try to save as many as they can, friendly and enemy alike, which again confused the Pan. One of the Pans still on the planet actually recorded a human soldier, an unarmored soldier, not one in one of these big bulky suits, but simply had a little bit of armor around him, running through the area, trying to find others, trying to take corners, trying to clear the area. When he turned into a courtyard, he saw a group of Pan trying to run away from the Kirk. He saw the Kirk picking up these young ones, all of them young, and then simply biting off a limb or the head before discarding the rest, gulping down the limb with seemingly a sickening smile. This smirk was there as they licked the blood off their lips. Those that had parts ripped off were on the ground still screaming as the Pan would simply raise their foot and then crush the young ones underneath. Without a hesitation, On the video, it's seen this soldier charge directly into the group, screaming expletives the entire way. The Kirk realized this and turned their weapon, but the human emptied his weapon on the way in and used it as a club once it was empty. Other humans could hear this and entered the fray. Many of them saw the young ones on the ground, still running away, still being torn up by the Kirk, and they decided to just simply run in and destroy everything. When they ran out of weapons to shoot, they used knives. When they ran out of knives, they used sticks and bare hands. One of them even picked up a Kirk and tried to use his own body as a battering ram as he swung him around by his tail. Yet the Kirk's tails are prehensile. The tail came off and was spinning around. The human was left there dumbstruck for only a moment as the Kirk landed on the ground without his tail. Then the human simply grabbed the tail with both hands as hard as he could, it still moving violently in his hand, and then he proceeded to beat the Kirk to death with his own tail, screaming things like son of a canine and things of that nature. In an attempt to save the young, the human rage truly showed its face as they realized that the young ones, these that had barely even learned how to walk, those that had no concept of what was going on, only that there was some sort of danger, had tried to get away, and had been hunted down for what, a snack? The Kirk would find out that this is one mistake you don't make twice. After the battle, the humans actually didn't rest at all. They didn't even come in on shifts. They just seemed to be bringing down all sorts of shuttles, all sorts of vessels with that strange red mark on them, trying to save as many lives as possible, friendly and enemy alike, which again surprised everyone. Why would they try to save their foe? This didn't make sense. Many of the Kirk fought them a little bit until they got strapped down to whatever type of device they were being strapped down to, as the devices got to work to sedate the Kirk, and then they could finally work on them. The pan that had been damaged were immediately dealt with as fast as they could. Many of them died of rapid blood loss, and this again infuriated the humans. In one case, one of the humans was carrying several of the young ones over out of the 4 that he had in his arms. Only one was still breathing, and it breathed its last in his arms. The human screamed straight up towards the sky, looked over towards a Kirk that was there, still clutching his missing arm, and simply drew his knife, ran at the Kirk, and started slamming his blade down into the chest of the Kirk as it screeched in pain, many of the humans trying to pull it off, but the rage would not stop. Finally, he stopped as his blade actually broke, slamming into the ground underneath the Kirk after the entire chest cavity had been opened up. The Pan were frightened to death of this, as they watched those giant muscles in the arms flex, and hands covered in blood, such violence, yet they seemed to be the most caring and gentle whenever they came over to the wounded. They picked them up with such care. They treated the wounds. They made sure that not a single one would be missing any parts by the time they were done. The humans even brought some strange sort of pods, what they called regen pods, and they made sure that the Pan had their pieces again. Many of the kids that had lost their arms or legs suddenly had them back. It would take a while because atrophy is still a thing, but they would be able to run and play soon like everyone else. The Pan now looked at the humans as more than just primitives, even though their technology looked primitive. Well, it appears that looks can be deceiving. In this one battle, the humans had actually changed the course of the war, yet no one had known it yet, as they saved billions from a horrible fate. Along with that, they were able to save the garden world itself, which was able to feed another billion or so more with ease. This would be a supply cache that they could not afford to lose. The humans didn't understand this. They didn't seem to care. All they knew is that whenever they needed somebody, the humans would be there. Because of this, there's a new saying amongst all the species that are fighting against the Kirk. If you're ever in trouble, call the humans. Hello everybody, this is Syntax. Thank you so much for joining me on today's story. Before I go, I need to send out a giant thank you to one of my supporters. That would be Sir. Thank you, sir, so much for supporting the channel. And everyone else, I will see you on the next one. This is Syntax, ejecting.